Hi, welcome to Game Changer Chat. This is your host, Zakiya Mabry. I'm so excited to have our wonderful panelists today. This is October 1st, Disability Awareness Month. We have with us Jill, Andy, and Andrea. And I'm very, very excited about this panel because two of them I've known for well over a decade, and they've poured into me and mentored me to help me be the disability inclusion leader that I am today. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves. Jill, she is the CEO of Disability In, and I met her when I was just becoming to embrace being an individual with disabilities. And just Jill, if you would tell everyone who doesn't know who you are a little more about yourself and what it is that you do.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you, Zakiya. My name is Jill Houghton. I'm president and CEO of Disability In. We are a global nonprofit that empowers business to achieve disability inclusion and equality. And I would just call out to you that our name is Disability In because we have pride in disability being part of the human identity, part of the human experience, and we think it's a strength. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're most welcome. Andrea, I met her when Geraldine, who's on LinkedIn, she was having an empowerment network for women. And it was about empowering women, showing up who you are. And it was networking with powerful women on LinkedIn. And she showed up and she talked about what she was doing in the disability inclusion space and how she was connecting individuals in entertainment. And I was like, wow, that's a wonderful mission. And we have so much in common. And I'm so happy to have her today on the panel. Can you please tell us a little more about you and what it is that you do?
First of all, thank you so much, Zakiya, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having this discussion today. It's sometimes we have these uncomfortable discussions, but in order to be change agents, we need to have those discussions. My name is Andrea Jennings. I'm an actress. I have a production company called Shifting Creative Paradigms. I'm a Black woman with a disability with living in those intersections. And my mission and goal is to change the paradigms of how people view people with disabilities. So I often act as a script consultant, a consultant in different spaces and places, and I advocate for universally designed infrastructures in all spaces. So thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're most welcome. And Andy Imperato, I've known him for over a decade. We've gone to lunch. I view him as a mentor and a colleague in this diversity disability space. I met him when he was at AAPD, and again when I was just getting comfortable with who is Zakiya. And I thank you for your mentorship, your leadership in this space. Can you please tell people more about who you are and what it is that you're currently doing?
Sure. Thank you, Zakiya. I'm honored to be part of this panel. I am a disability rights lawyer, policy wonk. I moved to California from DC in January to become the new executive director at Disability Rights California, which is a federally funded legal services agency that serves people with all types of disabilities across the state of California. And I grew up in Southern California, so I'm excited to be coming back to my home state after 30 years away. I have lived experience with bipolar disorder. I've been open about it throughout my career. And one of my favorite things to do is to cultivate emerging leaders with disabilities. And I'm very proud of you, Zakiya, and I'm excited to be joining you on this platform.
Thank you so much. As we get started, I would just like to open it up with a question for all of the panelists. Can you talk about why is disability more than just hiring individuals with disabilities? Why is it more than just a business case?
Jill, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Disability knows no stranger, right? Andrea talked about the intersectionality of disability and how um, uh, diverse we are as a group of people with disabilities when it comes to business and the inclusion of people with disabilities. Disability inclusion lives everywhere, from culture and leadership to your procurement practices and everything in between. So we can't just think about it from an employment standpoint, but we have to think about it holistically throughout the company.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to the point that Jill is making, I've seen a lot of corporations, because everyone is having this discussion now, and some of them are jumping on this bandwagon, and it's kind of like a PR campaign to them. But actually, they should really be very interested in the diversity conversation for many other different reasons. People benefit from that. Um, People with disabilities make up a large segment. We're actually the largest segment in the population. So why wouldn't you want to include that? I'm one of the things that I try to do is shift the creative paradigms, which sometimes we think we're hiring the best candidate, but how can you do that if you're excluding a large part of the segment? People with disabilities are opinion leaders and we're influencers. I can't tell you how many times someone has asked me, what's your favorite brand of you name it, or what's your favorite movie? And so that doesn't happen just because I have a disability. I mean, those conversations still go on. People with disabilities have a large amount of discretionary income to spend. So our purchasing power is, get this, $500 billion. So that's a lot of money laying on the table. It's the right thing to do, but we're not looking for people to coddle us. We're successful people, and we have taken the time to be trained. So it really is a disservice not to include people with disabilities.
Very excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, Zakiya, you asked about kind of how is it more than just hiring. And I think it's important to recognize that people acquire disabilities while they're working. So if you think about it from a management standpoint, some of your top performers are people with disabilities who may or may not be comfortable being out and open with their disabilities. And if they're not comfortable being out and open, they're probably not getting accommodations that they might need, which would help them be even more productive. And then anybody in your workforce can acquire a disability at any time. So as an employer, if you develop competence in supporting people with disabilities, having universal design when you buy technology, when you design workspaces, obviously the whole nature of work is changing in the context of COVID. And we're learning a lot about working from home, which is going to be a game changer for a lot of folks with disabilities. It's basically good management. You know, if you can create a work environment where people with disabilities can thrive, everybody in that work environment is going to be better supported. They're going to be happier. They're going to have more employee engagement. You're going to have more innovation, and you're going to have less turnover. So there's lots of good reasons to think about disability from a business standpoint.
I concur 100%. Thank you, panelists, for your answers. If everyone who's watching right now, can you please just share where geographically you're tuning in from? And also are you a business owner, an employee, and what type of industry do you work in? Just so we'll know. Thank you. This question is going to go to Jill. There's prevalent research from Accenture that reveals financial benefits of including individuals with disabilities in business. Why do you think the employment rate is still so low with all the research that's been done?
You know, I think we're on a journey, right? We have a lot of work to do. We're barely scratching the surface. Yes, we do have a business case that was developed by Accenture called Getting to Equal the Disability Inclusion Advantage that really demonstrates that it pays to be inclusive. But the thing is that there's still a lot of unconscious bias, right? Lack of accessibility, barriers that we have to overcome, attitudes that we have to change, work that we have to do. And we just have to keep keep chipping away. At Disability In, we've joined forces with the American Association of People with Disabilities, and actually Andy Imbrata serves on the advisory board for something called the Disability Equality Index, where we've created a benchmarking tool to really help the large Fortune 1000 scope businesses and the AmLaw 200 to lean in and to really what measures matters, right? And to look at their leadership and culture, employment practices, community engagement, enterprise-wide access, supplier diversity, and their actions that they're taking outside of the US.
Yeah, you make some very valid points. And this goes back to what was mentioned earlier about people not wanting to disclose perhaps their disability in their workspace. And maybe it's because their culture is not such where they feel comfortable. Why don't they, pulling back that layer of the onion, why don't they feel comfortable? Maybe because the organization is such where it's not welcoming, maybe for those who are marginalized or those with disabilities. So that goes back to it's a leadership issue. And so kudos for the work that you all are doing in the Disability Index. And that was a question that we were going to talk about a little later. But since you brought it up, can you, for those who are not aware, can you talk a little bit now? Since I'm one, even when I'm doing my facilitation, if you bring it up, we're going to talk about it now. So go ahead and just bring up what is the DEI index, so people are aware.
So really, it's a partnership between AAPD and Disability In, and we came together to bring people with and without disabilities to create a tool that would help businesses measure their actions in the different categories that I just described. And there are weighted questions and non-weighted questions. And companies use this as a tool to identify opportunities where they can do better. Now, they can, if they score an 80, a 90, or 100, we celebrate that they're a company that's making a commitment, that they're on the journey, but it in no means, means that they're perfect. The companies that score below an 80, we don't talk about who they are because it's a carrot and not a stick, and it's intended to help them do better. And so it really shines a light on issues that the advisory committee has identified as being important. So if we use COVID as an opportunity, the advisory committee has just gone through a whole modernization of the tool to really dig into areas like enterprise-wide access. And we modernized the questions, or we leaned into the benefits category and modernized the benefits questions and really looked at, are there helpful questions in there around mental health, et cetera, to help companies really identify the opportunities where they can do a better job of being more inclusive of people with disabilities through their policies and their practices.
Thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, now we're going to go talk to Ms. Jennings about programs positively changing the way America feels about people with disabilities. They prove that TV series and film storylines or characters with disabilities are good for business. For example, Born This Way. They have 7 diverse young people with Down syndrome as they move forward in independence and deal with issues around employment independence. NCIS, we all know that show, right? It's featured in New Orleans, and they have one person with a wheelchair. And then we have Daryl in the Chill Mitchell, an African-American actor who uses a wheelchair. And Sesame Street, we all watched that growing up. We loved it, right? Sesame Street was educating children since the 1960s. And it had so many characters that exposed us to various aspects of disability inclusion. So how do you recommend producers employ individuals with talents that have disabilities? after I gave these examples of, some that do. But here now, what do you recommend?
Thank you, Zakiya, for that question. That's a very good question and a very important one. Looking at the history and the span of how people have portrayed people with disabilities, that has to grow like with anything. We want to modernize it, as Jill has said. And we're happy that those movies and Sesame Street and all of those programs have included us. But what I focus on is appropriately representing people with disabilities and the best practices of that. Those are some great examples that you've given. Born This Way was a huge influence. That was a game changer within itself. Not only are we taking people with Down syndrome and we are showing them on television, we're not exploiting them. We're actually empowering them, and you're getting to see like three-dimensional real life situations. And so with that show alone, just mentioning that show, this is definitely an accurate portrayal because they're narrating their own story. They're not being exploited. So that was an excellent example. I remember certain scenes on Sesame Street, and that's what was a very educational show. So showing someone that's deaf or hard of hearing is very important, especially when we're young. We're very impressionable between ages 1 to 7. So those sorts of programs for children are extremely important in developing their sense on how they perceive people with disabilities. There's a movie called The Peanut Butter Falcon, and that also was a great representation and an accurate portrayal of people with disabilities, and it included an actor who had Down syndrome, and his name is Zakiya. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But all of these examples are great, and we need to have more in the pipeline. We need to be able to produce more, because within each culture, as we all know, there's diversity. There's diversity within the culture of disability. We're not monolithic individuals, so we all have our own stories. And so it's very important to do that. One of the things that I contribute in that space is script consulting. And with that, some people are well-intended, but then they use terms that are outdated, such as wheelchair bound. And so that gives you an impression that someone is limited, when in fact, they're really not. Mm-hmm. And so wheelchairs, I was a wheelchair user at one time for many years. And so I wasn't mad at the wheelchair. I wasn't bound to it. It was actually gave me freedom, and I decorated it, and I had a really cool wheelchair. Mm-hmm. It's the barriers that are that's the problem. Mm-hmm. It's not, so my wheelchair was actually something that was great. So right there, that's a stigmatized word, and it has a negative connotation. So that's an example of how easily you can just take one term and, just totally make something negative. I've done it. I actually made a sizzle reel, and in my sizzle reel, I used the term I suffered from, and I had to go, oh my gosh, So this is how easy. Now, I'm a person who's actually trying to, let people see people with disabilities in another light, and I just use the word suffer. So sometimes it is, it's an unconscious thing. It's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. We have to grow with the times. And so I do believe that's really important. So how the entertainment companies and the world can actually change this is it starts from the top up. The producers, the EPs, the showrunners, they are a part of this. But when they are able to get control of a show, they have a duty. And, that is just to make sure that they communicate to casting directors what they're looking for, so that the casting directors can actually feel like, okay, I want to bring people in with disabilities. This is something that they weren't really told to do before. So, but a lot of that comes from the top, from the networks. We need to get more people with disabilities on the boards, on the top positions, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, everywhere. And I'm sure that that's pretty much the same even in Jill's space, and Andrew's space and Andy's space. And I love what Jill said as far as the measuring tools. That lets me know when people are very sincere about what they're doing and not just coming in one time and trying to, fix something. let's go back and see that did this work. Some people have programs geared toward diversity, and I had interviewed some of the recipients of those awards. And sadly to say, I've gotten some great feedback, but I've gotten some negative feedback that the recipients were just left alone after a year. And so that's not good to know. So when you have these programs, make sure that there's follow up and follow through and be intentional. And with any other goals and any other initiatives that you have at your company, there's got to be, a measuring tool. Mm-hmm. So those are some things that I think is very important. Include language that doesn't stigmatize. It starts with casting. So all of that. And again, it starts with the top. We need to get more people that look like me and look like other people with disabilities in those game-changing positions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. To summarize, change starts at the top, words matter, and have people who can identify with you in the roles, to include people with physical disabilities and non-apparent disabilities in the roles and in the decision-making positions. Before I get to Andy for his question, I'm just going to go and look what people are posting. Matthew Reed says, this is awesome. Shelly says, top down. Shelby is tuning in from Washington, D.C. Andrew, an employee, says hello. Shalette Robinson is a business owner in alternative medicine. She says hello. We have someone, Miss Freeman, she's tuning in. I'm an HR professional from the Washington, D.C. area. Michael is tuning in from Australia. Someone, Brandon, is tuning in from Vienna, Virginia. We have Diana saying that she's noticed that more non-disabled persons in the past have focused during the COVID. And let's see. Isabel is saying hello. And Diana is tuning in from Florida. So we have a lot of people tuning in and watching this broadcast. So thank you so much for this podcast. This is helping a lot of people. Andy, what are the advantages and disadvantages of remote working for individuals with disability from your stance?
Well, I think we're figuring that out in a world where everybody is working from home. One of the disadvantages of assuming that people with disabilities would prefer to work from home is we miss out on the integration of going to an office and being with colleagues and having the informal interactions that you would have in an office. So I think it's a mistake to think that working from home is the best option for everybody, no matter what their disability is, or if they don't have a disability. I think it's good to have a workplace that's flexible and that allows people to work from home and work in the office in ways that work for them. If you have a disability that affects your ability to drive or your ability to access transportation, working from home can be a huge game changer. And in the United States, if you talk to people like Jill right now is in Kansas, if you talk to people in rural areas, people with disabilities in rural areas, they will tell you the biggest barrier to employment for them is accessible transportation. Mm-hmm. So in places where we don't have accessible transportation and affordable transportation, being able to work from home can make a huge difference. But obviously, if we're all expected to connect over these video platforms, it's also really important to have a high-speed internet connection. And there are lots and lots of people in this country who do not have a high-speed internet connection, and that can really affect their ability to be successful in working from home. So, it's like most things with disability, it's such a diverse category, and the range of jobs are so diverse that it opens doors for some people and it closes doors for others. It's kind of like ride sharing. Ride sharing has been a game changer for so many people with disabilities that have transportation barriers, but it also creates new barriers if it's not wheelchair accessible for people who use wheelchairs or scooters or other mobility devices. So we have to get to a point as a society where we have a lot of different options and where people are comfortable asking for what they need to be as productive and successful as possible at work. And I'm hoping through this pandemic, we're learning that it's a lot easier to support people in working from home than we thought it was. And I know for my organization, there are probably going to be a lot of people who have working from home as their standard of what they want even after the pandemic is over, because they're realizing that it's better for them and their lifestyle.
Very good. And being comfortable about asking, I have found in my career, just comes with time. You don't really know what you need or what you works best for you until you experience things. But that's a very good point. And even during this time, we've seen since March that there has been an increase of webinars and um, conferences that have been online. And I would want those who are watching this to consider individuals with disabilities as you have these different platforms and making them accessible to individuals with disabilities when you're having these different type of experiences. Make sure that it's accessible for all people. Uh, So if you guys have any questions who are watching this, don't forget to drop your questions down in the comment section and to like and share this discussion. Now we're going to head back over to Jill. Jill, what advice do you have for employers looking to make their workforce more inclusive for those who have disabilities?
So I'd say two things. Okay, I would invite employers to register for the Disability Equality Index, laser focused on that. So registration is open until January 29th. And the questions live in the public domain 365 days a year. They're out there, intended to be a tool to help people. So if you go to disabilityequalityindex.org, you can actually download the questions and get started working on them. The next thing that I would say is that the greatest resource that you have as a business are your people. Mm-hmm. And we are 1 in 4 of the people that you already have. So you have an opportunity to leverage your people and to engage with people with disabilities. So if you have an employee resource group comprised of people with disabilities and allies, that is one of the greatest resources that you have, and you need to tap into it. If you don't have one, then you have an opportunity right now to build one. And so I would just encourage you. I think a lot of times we're engaged in these conversations where people are talking about how do we make our business more disability inclusive, and they think that they have to start on the outside. They're like, oh, they're trying to figure out how to get people in the door. And you stop and you say, listen, like 1 in 4 of us have a disability. 70% of us have disabilities you can't see. Guess what? We're already here. And that's when you start to see people raise their hand, it's me, and telling their story. So there's a real opportunity to leverage your people. And to that point, encourage people to tell their stories. Yes. When we see companies with these storytelling campaigns, when leaders are sitting down and being human with their employees and sharing their stories, it encourages others to feel safe and to feel valued and to come out and share their stories. And obviously, the last key piece of it is, if you don't have accessibility, none of it works. So really building accessibility into every part of your business. To your point, Zakiya, we've gone virtual, it's really created a tipping point for this conversation that accessibility matters. That, if you're having a town hall meeting, you have a sign language interpreter, you have live captioning, you make sure that color contrasts are appropriate. That screen readers can work with the platform that you're using, and the list goes on. But you don't want to leave people behind. And the way to not leave them behind is to engage with the people that you already have.
Absolutely. Oh, and just a reminder, when you said that, closed captioning is available on the YouTube edition of this um, live. If you go to YouTube, it's in closed captioning. Um, and I just wanted to dissect a little bit when you talked about allies. Disability inclusion, of course, is a part of the dimension of diversity. And so allies apply to disability inclusion and applies to when you're talking about race or anything. But can you, panelists, just talk a little bit about what the word allies means when you're talking about any dimension of diversity?
Andrea, you want to go first?
Sure. Allies, to me, that's an excellent question, Zakiya. Are people that are not necessarily a part of that, marginalized group. However, they have a really good interest and they want to help. So for me, being in the place and the space that I am in entertainment and as an actress and having a production company, so as a content creator, how somebody can be the best ally for me in my space, and this may work, for other spaces as well, is a lot of people came to me after a lot of, what was going on, like how can we help you, even as a Black woman. But this is where we get into the difference between equality and equity. So there's a difference,
Right.
And when you're trying to promote equity, you have to realize that there's an admission of there's a lack of opportunities for that marginalized community. So that ally wants to bridge that gap and help that, that gap of that opportunity. So if there's a privileged person that I know that's an ally, they just have to be, it's really not that hard. They just have to go inward and figure out what it is that they can do. That may look like unmuting my voice. People with disabilities, they have to be encouraged to use their voice, but sometimes they've used it and no one listens. So an ally can actually highlight them, unmute their voices. This panel is unmuting my voice and everyone's voice, allowing me to be heard, and then mentioning my name in places that maybe it wouldn't be mentioned. There could be an opportunity for a privileged person, but they may actually, say, hey, Andrea may be able to be, good with this. I may not have had that opportunity, otherwise. So allies, it means different things to different people, but for me, that's what it means to me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, Zakiya, the cross-disability community is incredibly diverse. And, one of my favorite things that we did when I was at the American Association of People with Disabilities was a summer internship program where young folks with all types of disabilities came to Washington for internships, working for members of Congress, working in the executive branch. And that internship is still going on. But one of the things that I enjoyed watching over the course of the summer, every summer, was how folks learned to be advocates for each other's disabilities and each other's accommodations. So they weren't asking necessarily for what they needed, but they were making sure that something was there for one of their colleagues. And, Jill was talking about accessibility. One of the mistakes a lot of businesses make is they assume accessibility is all about bricks and mortar. Is a wheelchair accessible? Do we comply with the ADA? But a lot of accessibility is more about culture. Do we explain stuff in plain language so people with intellectual disabilities can understand what we're saying, which generally is going to make everybody understand it better? Do we use insider language that excludes people, or do we try to use language that everybody can understand? Do we have a welcoming environment? Do we have a flexible environment? Do we have an environment where people can laugh and be informal with each other? There's a lot of ways to kind of embrace accessibility. And the other ally issue that I'll bring up is sometimes it's helpful for somebody who's developing a disability identity to be with somebody who has a stronger disability identity, who can encourage them to be out and open with their disability and model for them how to do that. I think that's particularly important for people with mental illness, you may have received a lot of messages from your mental health practitioners, from your family, that this is not something that you want to talk about at work. And if you have a colleague who has some stature in the workplace, who is out and open with their mental health disability, it can make it a lot easier for you to be out and open and not feel that it's going to be a negative or somehow held against you. So I just think there's a lot of ways to be an ally even within the disability community, and then certainly from folks who don't have the lived experience but are supportive of this kind of inclusion. It's important to just listen to workers with disabilities and don't assume you know what they need, but ask them what they need and then support them in getting what they need.
Andy, your points are very well received, and that is my lived experience. It was, like I said in my opening, I was not comfortable even being my authentic self until I actually could see successful individuals, similar situated, being successful. So yes, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Thank you for that.
Andy, that was so well said. I mean, that's across all industries, not
Absolutely.
assuming, because people want to, and they want to help and they're well intended, but just, embracing and I'm sure Jill understands this, but it's the belonging, and I'm sure Andy understands this. A lot of people don't know these terms, but belonging and othering is something to really study, and embracing, that sense of belonging. When people open up spaces at work and says, let's talk about this, and not ignore this, but allowing that person with that lived experience to speak about it themselves, because we can't assume that what they're going through. So, and as Zakiya brought up, just trying to be her authentic self, wondering if this is okay, is she going to be accepted? So that whole subject of belonging and othering is extremely important. But I just wanted to let you know what you said was profound.
Very profound. I just want to bring up, Jill, can you talk about the internships that Disability In has? Because I also think that that's also some things that a lot of people don't know about, that when I'm just in my day-to-day walks, I've sent you people. So things that I think that are really great, I tell everybody about. I'm a walking, I don't know what you call it, but tell people about Disability In. And I just think the people, that internship is very rewarding. Can you just talk to that?
Well, so let me just say, first of all, thank you. And Zakiya, you paved the way. You were one of the first.
I was the first. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. So at Disability In, we have a program called Next Gen Leaders. And each year, it's a pretty competitive opportunity. The applications are open right now. So if you go to disabilityin.org and what we do and click on Next Gen, there's information there. It's a 6-month structured program where we kind of work backwards. We start with our partners. We start with business, and we identify a sea of people who want to mentor. And a lot of times those individuals are people with disabilities, right? Who work in a wide variety of roles. They may be engineers, they may be chief communications officers, they may be financial analysts, and the list goes on. And then we work to match the people that are the mentors with a select group of college students and recent graduates. So this year in 2020, our class had 200. They were 59% people of color, 47% women, 20% LGBTQ, and 60% of them were in the STEM field. So really intersectional group of talent who go through this process. And then we have a talent accelerator at the end where companies are really competing for this talent. And it's a very competitive process where people emerge from this program with careers, with internship opportunities. And this year, obviously, during these unprecedented times, we recognize that the next gen talent that was part of the program have faced a lot of barriers that were even more extensive than usual, right? So what we've done is we've decided to provide this class the ability to opt in for next year. We're going to double the size of the class next year. And we're adding more opportunities for companies to interact with this talent. So for example, on October 29th, we're doing another matchmaking session. So in July, we had like 675 matchmaking sessions with the talent. And out of that, like 31 companies made offers. There's still a huge pool of talent there. And we're told that in October, it's a good time for companies. It's when they're recruiting their internships for the next year. So we're having a whole nother cycle. I'll be quiet. I just want to say the really awesome thing about the next gen leaders is that when they cross over to the other side and they get in these companies, they come back. It's people like you, Zakiya. They come back and they mentor and they pay it forward for the next group. So, you know, whether it's Brian Stromer at Microsoft or, you know, Ike Tallerin at Accenture, just really awesome talent that's climbing the corporate ladder and at the same time paying it forward for their peers.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I don't know where I am right now. Okay, Andy, do you see a major difference in the needs of the population you serve now in California versus when you were in Maryland?
You know, I think there are some unique things in California. We're dealing with wildfires here, which was not really an issue in Maryland. Maryland, we had occasional hurricanes. It seems like climate change is affecting the whole country, though, in different ways, and people with disabilities are kind of disproportionately affected by, like, if you think about evacuating during COVID or having a power shut off during COVID, if you have a disability where you need the power related to your, meeting your needs as a person with a disability, it's a life-threatening, scary situation. So these are issues that are front and center in California that I think will become more important in Maryland and other states over time. But, I have to say, what I really appreciate about being in California right now is that we have a governor who's genuinely interested in children and adults with disabilities. We have a Secretary of Health and Human Services in California who has a strong interest in people with disabilities. The governor's kind of in-house counsel was Obama's Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Catherine Lehman at the Department of Education. She's also the head of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So we have a leadership in the state right now that I feel, as disability advocates, we have access to them. They're listening to us. They want California to be a leader. So that's exciting for me, and I'm hopeful that other states will start to look to California as a leader and a model, and that we can have an impact on the whole country by innovating here and influencing the technology industry, and as Andrea is doing, the entertainment industry. If you just think about it, the technology industry and the entertainment industry affect the lives of people with disabilities all over the world, and they affect what's possible for people with disabilities all over the world. So I feel like California is the right place to be to try to have a global impact that will be a game changer, to use your name of your show, for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Andy. Andrea, when producing events, what do you think is important to remember in terms of disability inclusion?
Well, I think that, again, like I mentioned earlier, you, especially in the arts industry, we're creatives, producers, event planners, networks. And it's so funny to me, and it's a little perplexing. And even I have to ask myself, So if you hire an actress and they can't jump off a building, what you do is you have an accommodation. But when it comes to someone with a disability, people are stumped, and it's a fear. So a lot of this is fear-based. And so I feel as if we can just put on our creative hats and understand, first of all, the value, again, that people with disabilities have. They're opinion leaders. They have big voices. We're just like anyone else. Again, we're not monolithic. We have diversity within our group. And so it's just keeping that in mind and first understanding that segment that you're missing out on. And then it's just like any other segment. When you want to reach out to women of a certain demographic, then you study, what it is, that they like. So I think just understanding all of the needs that people with disabilities have. And that's why I advocate for more of a universally designed infrastructure, because that's access for all. And that way, you'll have these things readily available. And then it's just about making that message, giving that message out there that what is it that you need. And I love this panel, by the way, Zakiya. You really are a game changer. I mean,
oh, thank you so much.
I love a lot of the things that they're saying. I'm sitting here in the background, I'm smiling because, when you're advocating and you're in your, I'm getting out there and I'm networking, but especially, with COVID and we're being quarantined, it's just really good to hear that, things are still moving along and people, they're still, have hope and things are still getting done. So I just love this panel. But some of the things that looks like with events and concerts, and one of the things that I saw was just great, but it should be standard, is, ASL interpreters at concerts. And so I think that's important, especially in the arts world. Again, we're creatives and we just have to really put on our thinking hats and think, how can we include people? And there's another thing. A lot of times people, they say, well, I'm ADA compliant, and that's fine. But I promote more, let's go above and beyond that. These are your patrons. You want to be, again, that othering and that belonging. So it's not just, am I ADA compliant, but what am I doing to go above and beyond to give this patron an experience so that they can keep returning? What about customer retention? So a lot of these initiatives are the same initiatives that you would have in any other, goal or plan or project that you have. And it's just carrying those same initiatives on to attracting people with disabilities. And something I did want to mention is how that looks like in the space of acting and entertainment. And so as an actress, there's so many things that I come across. First of all, you have to get, if you're doing an in-studio photography session to get headshots, you would need an accessible photographer. So many times there's photography studios, but they have steps. And so it's this big fear thing. Well, how do I, meet the needs of that population? It's about asking, I think Andy, brought that up. Mm-hmm. It's about asking and, seeing what it is that we need. So there's acting workshops. There's many of them, by the way. If anyone that's watching this wants to get into entertainment and they have questions, at the end, Zakiya may be able to get you in touch with me by my website, and we can have those discussions, because I'm in touch with a lot of people. It's not just myself. There's a lot of great people in the industry that's fighting for change. And I'm fortunate enough to know some of them, not all of them. But there's workshops, there's labs, there's companies, respectability, there's the Media Access Awards. There's so many things that is going on. The Casting Society of America put on a program where, so producers could not say, I don't know any disabled actors and actresses. Mm-hmm. So the Casting Society of America had a program where they recruited a lot of actors and actresses with disabilities. So now there's this huge database. And so people can't say that. There's consultants like myself. There's so many different avenues. There's the Producers Guild has, workshops. And so there's a lot of information, wealth of information out there. So acting classes need to be accessible. Casting directors, why does that character have to be a white male? Why can't, can we look at that character description And, can we actually take those, barriers off, those parameters off? Is there something in your script? Are you working on a script currently that you can actually maybe say, this person doesn't have to be this. They could be somebody in a wheelchair, or they can be somebody, let's just open this up. Again, how do you know that you're casting or even hiring the best candidate when you're leaving out a whole underrepresented group that's very talented? And let me tell you something, people with disabilities, we're not asking for someone to feel sorry for us. We don't want to be patronized. And, we don't want that. We're successful people, and we just want to be brought into it. So when I ask for accommodations, I usually say something like, in order for me to be successful in this is what I'll need. And so that lets people know. So it's a two-way street. I have to advocate for myself, but people shouldn't assume what I need or that it's going to be even expensive. So in order to have a lot of these accommodations, it really doesn't cost a lot. The studios spend more on trying to find a stunt person probably than it would be to do some of these accommodations. And again, universally designed best practice infrastructures. Well, universally designed infrastructures are probably best practice, is what I wanted to say. So accessible restrooms on set, accessible trailers, accessible dressing rooms. So, of course, the interpreters, captions when in post-production. If a person discloses or divulges their disability at that point, how do you engage them? I think Jill was talking about, engaging. All of these things are really important. And what do you do? How do you engage a person? So again, when it comes to entertainment, when you're leaving authentic stories out, this is what America wants. And when you're leaving characters and you're only telling one-sided or one-dimensional or two-dimensional, people want to see, three-dimensional characters. And that should be what, networks want to bring in. So again, you're leaving out so many stories that people that can relate to. So that actually will affect them in the long run and their bottom line.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing all of that to our attention. And at the end, my team will post all your information. And when you were talking about some of the things that individuals with disabilities in the entertainment space have to navigate, it made me also think about my time when I assisted with Disability Mentoring Day. And I believe that's with AAPD. And I'm pretty sure Andy can point you in the right direction who's handling that now and talk about what is Disability Mentoring Day and connect you with who is the point of contact for that. So I'm going to toss that question over to Andy. Can you explain what Disability Mentoring Day is?
Sure, that's something that actually started way back in the Clinton administration when Jonathan Young was the liaison to the disability community. He saw the White House celebrating all these different events over the course of the year, and he wanted to have an event that brought people with disabilities into the White House. So they created Disability Mentoring Day, and then he kind of handed it off to the American Association of People with Disabilities, and they ran with it with local coordinators around the country. So if you go to their website at aapd.com, you can learn about it. You can also Google Disability Mentoring Day and learn about it. But it's basically a one-day job shadow where people with disabilities, it's usually young people, but it doesn't have to be just young people. They can spend a day shadowing somebody who's working in an area that they're interested in. And one of the benefits of it is for the employer, they're exposed to a lot of diversity around disability. So many employers, when they hear disability, they assume they're going to be able to see the person's disability, or they're thinking of somebody they know. And as you can imagine, the mentees are as diverse as the disability community. So it often creates an education for the employer that this is a broad category, a lot of different kinds of disabilities, lots of different kinds of interests from a career standpoint. So that's Disability Mentoring Day in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was familiar with AAP, but I was not familiar about that specific program. So see, Zakiya, the things that you're doing, this is
great.
This
amazing. I helped with their kickoff in Minnesota one year, and it was amazing. So yes. We're gonna wrap up soon with me. Here's a question that we have from Ms. Freeman. What can companies do to be proactive to help engage disabled candidates into a hiring company? What can they do? What do the policies look like?
I think we'll all have something to say on this. I'll say quickly, it helps to have people with visible disabilities on your website and in your recruiting materials so that you're showing the public that you're looking for talent with disabilities. It helps to say affirmatively on your job postings, people with disabilities are welcome to apply. It helps to have diverse hiring teams that include people with disabilities on the hiring team. And it helps to make sure that you're ready to provide any accommodation that somebody needs in the hiring process. If they need a sign language interpreter or something else, that's not going to throw you for a loop. Your team knows how to do that, and you give people the opportunity to ask for that as they're applying for the job.
Very good. I want to say hi to Dana, who's tuning in, and Mark, who is tuning in from overseas. Jill, can you provide your final comments and tell us what else do you have going on for the last quarter of the year?
So I just want to say thank you. This has been a real honor, Zakiya, a game changer. I've loved listening to the comments of Andrea and Andy always, because we go way back. In terms of what are we focused on for the rest of the year, we're laser focused on gaining the participation of the Fortune 1000 and the AmLaw 200 in the Disability Equality Index. We actually have a campaign going on right now called Are You In? Are you in for building a global economy inclusive for everybody? If you go to inclusion.org, you can see that there are 25 Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 CEOs that are calling on their peers to participate in the Disability Equality Index and to take action. And there are more coming. There are 22 investors that have signed on to a joint investor letter calling on the companies that they invest in to participate in the Disability Equality Index and to prioritize disability inclusion. They manage almost $3 trillion in assets under management, and there are more signatories coming. So we are going to pull out every lever to keep moving forward to gain the participation in the DEI, because we know that what companies measure matters. And if they're not measuring their policies and practices related to disability inclusion, nothing will change. And so they have an opportunity to utilize the tool and to do better and to do more.
Thank you. Andrea, can you tell us what are your final thoughts and what are you focused on for this last quarter of 2020?
First of all, Zakiya, again, just kind of mirroring what Jill said, it's been a pleasure. This is really important conversations to be had, and there were solutions provided. And so that's so important. I'm honored to be in the company of such great, panelists and yourself, Zakiya. Thank you so much for having me here. My takeaway that I would like for everyone to get is that disability is diversity. And again, thank you for highlight disability as part of the diversity conversation. Representation matters. When someone sees another person that looks like them in a leadership position, that speaks volumes. Create spaces and places that everyone can partake in. And what I'm working on is pitching and developing shows. And I'm working on a podcast. Actually, that podcast should launch in a few days. And it's basically shifting creative paradigms. And we're going to be having really uncomfortable conversations, but solution-based, not just, just talking about what isn't being done. But just like with this panel, helping to educate people on what they can do to be game changers, and just to give them best practice measures and initiatives to guide them as they step into this, for some, a new way to make their businesses inclusive. And again, this is not a PR campaign. This is something that should be long term. I notice a lot of people are hiring COOs or chief officers of diversity, but again, that has to be taken on with a lot of seriousness and a budget as well, so that people can really make the important changes that we need right now.
I concur. Thank you. Andy, thank you so much for joining. Please tell us what are your final thoughts, and what does the last quarter of 2020 look like for you?
Well, thank you, Zakiya. This has been really a pleasure to participate. Two big things in the last quarter. One, we want to make sure everybody with a disability and their family and friends go out and vote in this election. We want to make sure that voting is accessible and that everybody can vote privately and independently in California. California has been a leader on accessible voting. There's going to be accessible vote by mail and also accessible voting in person, and we'll be monitoring to make sure that people have that opportunity across the state. Second big thing, Senator Harkin, my former boss, has been hosting these global summits on disability employment. He's going to do his first virtual Harkin Summit in December, so I'm honored to help plan that with him. And Jill has been a partner in that for many years, and we're excited to continue those global conversations about disability employment, particularly as the whole world has been responding to COVID and figuring out how to make the working from home work in a variety of professions and a variety of geographies. And then just in terms of the closing comment, I guess I'd go back to something that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said in his book. He has two children with disabilities, and in his book, he talked about how his experience as a father gave him another level of empathy that made him a better leader at Microsoft. And he said that the sensitization that he got from being a parent of two children with disabilities helped Microsoft rediscover its soul. That's his language. So I just think it's important to recognize if you do this right, it's going to be transformational. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. And it's not about complying with federal civil rights requirements or doing the bare minimum. It's about being open to being transformed by including people with disabilities in a meaningful way.
That's beautiful. I would like to thank each one of you for being a part of this Game Changer chat on October 1st, as we're celebrating 30 years of the ADA. And each one of you that tuned in, whether this live or watching the replay, you too can be a change agent. You have the opportunity also to take part of my Thrive class by going to www.thethriveclass.com. It starts October 5th. And just practice kindness. You can be part of the change. Thank you for tuning in again, and we'll talk with you next time. Peace, love, and many blessings. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1, close.